Back in the day when I used to watch CNN and vote for Democrats, when I was in college, there was one topic that I always disagreed with CNN on. I didn't understand their logic. The topic was voting ID laws. They claimed they were racist. They claimed it disenfranchised minority voters. And I thought their logic was racist. In today's video, we explore Georgia's new voting law. The left claims it's racist. Biden claims it's racist. Private companies are weighing in. And as the saying goes, get woke, go broke. I want to show you this tweet by Mark E. Elias. I'm going to put the image on the screen. This guy has over 400,000 followers, lefty. The new Georgia law will require voters to submit ID to vote by mail. If they use their driver's license, they need to provide the driver's license number. One of the two numbers below is correct. If they put the other, it will be rejected. Are you sure you would pick the right one? Well, one of the numbers has the letters DL before it. The other one doesn't. I would assume DL stands for driver license. Woo, driver license number. This one says driver's license number. This one just says DD. So I wouldn't get confused. But then he asks another important question. If you're among those who say with confidence that you would get it right, do you believe that voters who entered the wrong number should have their vote discarded? He's posting this question like if it's a tough question. But my answer to this is quite simple. Yes, their votes should be discarded. Why? Because I believe you got to at least do the absolute minimum to vote in the United States. We don't require you to own property. We don't require you to pay taxes. Sure, we don't require you to take a test. We just require that you're a citizen and to show me who you are. If you can't show me who you are, then sorry, you can't vote. I'm sorry. Now, I asked my family in Argentina what they think about this. They said, hey, do you guys have voting ID laws? And they didn't even understand what I was asking them. He's like, what do you mean? I said this, very simple. Do you have to show your photo ID when you vote? They said, obviously, do you not? I said, yeah, I'm in Florida, yes. But in many places in the United States, you don't need ID. And they were mind blown. And then I asked some friends in Colombia, hey, do you guys have voting ID laws? Like, do you have to show your ID when you go vote? And he says, yes. What are you asking me? The whole world, the civilized world, uses ID cards to vote because we need to know who you are. It's not racist. It's not disenfranchisement. And if you can't do the bare minimum to get a photo ID, then sorry, you shouldn't vote. What do you guys think? Comment down below. As I was doing research for this video, I came across a very disturbing article from the ACLU. I'm going to read it to you, parts of it. It's very short, I promise, but you need to see it to understand where the left is coming from, how they see voting ID laws. So let's check it out. From the now preposterous ACLU, oppose voter ID legislation. Fact sheet. Background. Voter ID laws are part of an ongoing strategy to roll back decades of progress on voting rights. 34 states have identification requirements at the polls. 7 states have strict photo ID laws, under which voters must present one of a limited set of forms of government-issued photo ID in order to cast a regular ballot. No exceptions. They make it sound like it's bad for you to show a photo ID. How else are we supposed to know you are you? Voter ID laws deprive many voters of the right to vote, reduce participation, and stand in direct opposition to our country's trend of including more Americans in democratic process. Many Americans do not have one of the forms of identification states acceptable for voting. That sentence doesn't make sense. Let's read it again. Many Americans do not have one of the forms of identification states acceptable for voting. That doesn't make sense. These votes are disproportionately low-income racial and ethnic minorities. Here we go. The elderly and people with disabilities. Such voters more frequently have difficulty obtaining ID because they cannot afford or cannot obtain the underlying documents that are a prerequisite to obtaining government-issued photo ID. 2 things. Most of the time, voting IDs, photo IDs, are free. Georgia's new law gives them out for free. And when they say they cannot obtain the underlying documents, does that mean? I think that means that they're illegal, but whatever. This section of the article is basically, what about is saying, what about people with disabilities who can't travel? What about people who are far from places where you can get your birth certificate? What about people who can't afford $100 to get their birth certificate to then get their free government IDs? Look, everybody can't be covered with everything. These people need to get their things together. But there's one more part that I wanted to show you. Voting ID laws are discriminatory. Minority voters disproportionately lack ID. Nationally, up to 25% of African American citizens of voting age lack government issued photo ID, compared to only 8% of whites. If that's true, that's unbelievable. States exclude forms of ID in a discriminatory manner. This is what I want to show you. Texas allows concealed weapons permits for voting, but does not accept student ID cards. Could it be because these permits are given out by the government and the student ID cards are not? Did you think about that? Enough with the ACLU, it gets more boring as we go, but let's talk about Georgia's new law, the myths and the facts. From the Daily Caller, Georgia passed a series of new voting laws aimed to curb alleged voter fraud, and myths about disenfranchisement and discrimination are running rampant. They are indeed, and even the President of the United States is partaking. The Election Integrity Act of 2021 expands in-person early voting dates and hours for most counties, according to Georgia Public Broadcasting. The original draft of the legislation would have scrapped all weekend voting aside from the second Saturday, but changes were made now to allow both Saturdays for the early voting period to hold voting and gives counties the option to hold voting on Sundays, according to the broadcasting. The legislation also requires 3 weeks of early voting and expands the hours the polls are open. The changes were made in response to opposition from racial justice groups who said the proposals targeted black voters who traditionally participate in souls to the polls voter drives that take place on Sundays, according to NPR. Myths. Voters won't have access to water while they wait in line. One of the provisions bans volunteers from handing out water or other items to voters standing in line. Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia, the ACLU, Andrea Young, criticized the law, including this specific provision. Senate Bill 202 is an anti-voter bill that attacks absentee voting, criminalizes giving Georgians a drink of water to their neighbors, allowing state to take over of county elections, and retaliates against the elected Secretary of State by replacing him with the State Board of Elections chair chosen by the legislator, not the voters. Joe Biden also criticized the bill. If you want any indication that it has nothing to do with fairness, nothing to do with decency, they passed a law saying you can't provide water to people standing in line while they're waiting to vote. But is that true? No, of course it's false, like almost anything that Joe Biden says. Fact, voters will still have access to water and are not forbidden from bringing their own food items. No person shall solicit votes in any manner or by any means or method, nor shall any person distribute or display any campaign material, nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any monetary gifts, including, but not limited to, food and drinks to an elector. It just says you can't bribe someone in line. Why is that a big deal? Oh, because the left want to bribe people. Myth: the election laws facilitate voter suppression. Another provision Democrats are criticizing is the provision requiring voters to show an ID to get an absentee ballot. An op-ed written by Terry Canfield calls the new law Jim Crow. Canfield acknowledges the law expands voter access, but then says requiring voters to show an ID presents unnecessary hurdles. How else are you supposed to identify a person? As you can see, this new Georgia law is flooded with misinformation. People are claiming it's racist, it disenfranchises people, people are not allowed to get water while they're standing in line for hours, and so on. So, in response to this, we saw many prominent CEOs of very prominent companies and even Senile Joe himself come out and denounce the Georgia legislator, the Georgia governor, and of course, the Georgia bill. Here's a clip of Senile Joe telling us how this new bill is worse than Jim Crow.
What do you think about the possibility that baseball decides to move their All-Star game out of Atlanta because of this political issue?
I think today's professional athletes are acting incredibly responsibly. I would strongly support them doing that. People look to them. They're leaders. Look at what's happened with the NBA as well. Look at what's happened across the board. The very people who are victimized the most are the people who are the leaders in these various sports. And it's just not right. This is Jim Crow on steroids, what they're doing in Georgia and 40 other states. What it's all about. Imagine passing a law saying you cannot provide water or food for someone standing in a line to vote. Can't do that? Come on. Or you're going to close a polling place at 5 o'clock when working people just get off? This is all about keeping working folks and ordinary folks that I grew up with from being able to vote.
Wow, I wonder if he's lying or he actually believes that's what the law says. To be clear, the law only disallows poll workers from giving people water in line. Poll workers can still give people water if they step out of line. And if you're in line by the time polls close, you can still vote. You just gotta get there to the line by the time the polls close. Even the Washington Post, who loves Joe Biden, gave him 4 Pinocchios for that one. Because they know they were lying. He was lying. But let's move on to the private industry, and let's start with Coca-Cola. It's recently come to light that Coke is training its employees in anti-racism and how whiteness is bad. So these comments really should not be a surprise to us. Check out the CEO of Coca-Cola.
I invited you on because I was really eager to hear your response as one of the biggest companies in Georgia to the call from Ken and Ken, more than 70 black executives, to do more to directly oppose this Georgia legislation. How do you react?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, let me be crystal clear and unequivocal. This legislation is unacceptable. It is a step backwards, and it does not promote principles we have stood for in Georgia around broad access to voting, around voter convenience, about ensuring election integrity, and this is frankly just a step backwards.
Notice how he didn't say anything specific, just a word salad. We will not stand by this injustice. Well, now, the GOP in Georgia is working to remove all Coke products from the legislative offices. Get woke, go broke. Another CEO that believed he had to speak about the injustices of the Georgia law was the CEO of Delta. Here's that CEO getting out of line.
Well, first of all, good to be with you, Gail. It's been a frustrating few weeks for all of us here in the state of Georgia. As the process unfolded, it was moving quickly. There were a lot of changes. Our team was in there, absolutely, expressing our points of view, making significant improvements to what had been proposed. But when we got a chance to finally see it all put together and had a chance to digest it, as well as listen and hear from the voices of our people about it, we realized that this was restricting their access, our people's access, particularly in the black community, and it did not step forward. It's important that we take a step forward here.
Mr. Bastian, the Georgia State House has now responded to your revised statement opposing the law, and they have voted to strip tax breaks that Delta benefits from there in the state of Georgia. That's a pretty big deal. I'm curious, what's your reaction to that?
I'm not going to respond.
Tens of millions of dollars in tax break lost. Get woke, go broke. It's just funny to me how some of these companies like Coca-Cola are out there posturing and virtue signaling how righteous they are, and they're fighting for justice, yet at the same time they're lobbying Congress to make it easier for them to use Chinese slave labor. I mean, here I thought thinking that hashtag Asian lives mattered. Now I know what some of you may be thinking, oh my god, that's cancel culture, the Georgia GOP is canceling Coke, oh my god, that's cancel culture, what you're doing to Delta, it's canceled. No, this isn't cancel culture. Cancel culture would be calling the grocery stores and telling them not to carry Coke. Cancel culture would be to call the airports and say, hey, if Delta is allowed on your airport, I will not be flying from your airport. They are racist bigots. That's cancel culture. This would be a boycott. Those two things are very different. But let's move on. Let me show you how CBS News, a news organization, has dropped its mask. They're actually an activist group. 3 ways you can protest the Georgia law? I thought you were a news organization, not an activist group. Silly me. And that's it. What do you guys think? Is requiring a photo ID or just a voting ID racist? Is it bad? Isn't it logical to require a photo ID to see that the person who's voting is the person they say they are? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not. Comment your opinions down below. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share. That really helps. See you next time.